Post and Newsbud Roundtable Conversation. I'm Peter B. Collins in San Francisco. Joining us this evening, or whatever time you're listening, but it is evening for me in San Francisco, Sibel Edmonds from Bend, Oregon, James Corbett from Western Japan, and Brock West from somewhere down under in Australia. Nice to have all of you with us. And today we're going to talk about Newsbud, and we're going to talk about it in the context of the presidential election campaign and coverage here in the good old US of A. And we have a little difference of perspective here, and we're going to share that with you because I think it will inform your understanding of what the mission of Newsbud is and how we are different from other media outlets. And Sibel, earlier today you shared with the group a stunning poll that was released and reported on by RT that shows that 91% of American voters under the age of 30 are not satisfied with a choice between Trump and Clinton in the November general election, and they explicitly want to see what is described as an independent running in this race. That number drops to 55%, but still a clear majority when you look at voters of all age groups. And recently, I just completed a couple of podcasts with an activist named Kevin Zeese. And Zeese has written a piece where he describes a path forward for Senator Bernie Sanders, who's currently running and losing in the Democratic primary. And he's losing because of the machinery that is controlled by the Clintons and their allies, and the various impediments that are built in to the two-party system in this country. Now, for Newsbud, my plans with the weekly video podcast that we'll be producing starting in June is not to cover the he said, she said of the campaign, or who raised the most money, or who got hit with a nasty tweet most recently from Donald Trump. But I see the potential here that if Bernie Sanders moves from the Democratic Party to the Green Party, that he will have access to the ballot in as many as 40 or 42 states with enough traction to possibly get to the 270 votes needed to win the presidency through our arcane electoral college. And while this is a bit of a crapshoot and it's really hard to predict how it might turn out, I consider it less risky than supporting either Clinton or Trump, and I think our viewers probably understand those reasons pretty well. So for me, this is a historic opportunity to break up the dominance, the duopoly, that Republicans and Democrats have enjoyed for decades, and the prospect is that that could lead to a real reorganization of the, the system and the electorate here in the United States. So that's my focus. Sibel?
No, it's a very interesting perspective, and this is one of the reasons I like Boiling Frogs post. I have loved it to have different perspectives within the same information news websites, and same thing applies to Newsbud as well, because you and I agreed on a lot of things, but in even this thing, for example, we have differing points, and we have been working together for 8 years. To me, that's a success story. For me and some other people that we have, it also boils down to the system. It's not only about the candidate. You know, you have the same system and you have different candidates. You end up having, even let's say you had someone independent succeeding and winning, you throw them inside the same system. You really can't expect anything to change. That's number one. And also, I think a lot of it boils down to the definition of independent, okay? I don't know exactly what people mean when they say independent, whether it's Green Party, Ralph Nader, or Sanders. I don't see much difference personally between Sanders and Hillary Clinton, and you may disagree with me, but as far as a lot of things that I have viewed as major problem, such as government spending and big government, I don't see how Sanders is going to be any better for people who stand for much smaller or even, minute level of government. So would I see it as improvement? The notion of independent parties sounds good and independent people, but then again, that may put this illusionary, false illusionary thing for people that that's the way to fix things. And I don't believe that is the way to fix it. You have to go really to the root causes of this thing. A good example, again, would be the media. People said, well, good. Now we have truthout.org, etc. They are not mainstream. They are alternative, right? Now we have been having this debate. Are they really alternative? So they were born, they were supported, and people cheered when they entered the scene as alternative. But when you get down to it, have we seen anything alternative? Or even if they meant to be alternative, they ended up entering it within a system that was the carryover from the mainstream. So, and this is why I thought this discussion would be interesting, because we do have these different perspectives, including perspective from Australia, where voting is compulsory, and we have James Corbett here, and I have listened to every single one of his programs, and I always tend to agree on this particular thing as well, in that when you have this far system and you're looking at some symbolic, or you get lost in the symbolism, this is how the system actually lasts. Because otherwise, of course, they're going to be calling us radicals, which I guess we are, according to them, when we say, hold on a second, you're looking at an entire system that is corrupt, and then you're looking at these tiny particles called candidate. Are we really talking about any change here? I mean, real significant change.
Well, I don't think it will be revolutionary, but I think that because Sanders is running from the outside, he's challenging the establishment, and in particular, he has called out the corruption of our pay-to-play campaign finance system. Now, it can't be fixed overnight, but the other side for me, and let's be honest, I've been around since Nixon was president, and I've been watching the ups and downs of the American political system. I'm very cynical about many aspects of it, but I refuse to just step outside and ignore it entirely, because I believe that I've been able to impact it in different ways at different times. And I've also seen, for example, just one example that I'll offer is that when Sanders started running about a year ago, he talked about a $15 minimum wage, and everybody said, oh, we can't do that. All the Republican candidates flatly said no increase in the minimum wage. And now we have the two coastal states, New York and California, that have passed measures to increase the minimum wage over the next 5 years to hit that $15 mark. Also, we have candidates who were opposed to marriage equality, and they have had to change to catch up with public attitudes that have shifted. And so change does happen. It doesn't happen in a pretty or predictable way. And I prefer to be an inside agitator than a completely outside critic. And also, I just feel, like I said, that there is a unique opportunity this year. It's not just Tweedledum and Tweedledee. There is a chance to radically shake up the system. But let's turn to James and Brock and get their perspectives as well. James?
Well, let me preface what I'm going to say by saying, first of all, I'm not stupid, and I realize there is a case to be made for gradual implementation of changes that over time can make a difference to society, and I'm not mocking or deriding that or ignoring the nuance of an idea like that. Having said that, that doesn't make for an interesting debate, so let me get to the more hardcore principles. Because ultimately, my position is not one of consequentialism. I am not looking at this as this plan of action will have this effect and it will benefit this number of people in this way, therefore it's slightly better than this way. I'm not into strategizing like that. I'm looking for the fundamental moral, ethical principles at play here. And I think it's twofold. One is that fundamentally, I am for the removal of violence and force as a means of getting people to do what you want them to do in society. And that is fundamentally what the political game is about. And so having 50% plus one or whatever magical number deciding that this or that person will be president and therefore, this or that policy will be implemented is only handing the keys to the kingdom to your worst enemies. Because at some point, someone you do not want to have that position of power is going to grab the brass ring of power and wield it for their purposes. And at that point, you've already bought into the system. So you're going to have to say, okay, well, I guess 50% plus one voted for it. So I guess we'll just have to wait for our turn. And that is not a game that I think that I want to play, let alone that is beneficial for society to play. The other part of this is that the Pentagon is never going to dismantle itself. The multi-trillion-dollar military-industrial terror complex is never going to go quietly into that good night. Oh, I guess there are enough people voted for this, or a politician is telling us to get rid of, to disband ourselves. We saw what happened when JFK said that he was going to crack the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter them to the wind. They scattered 1,000 pieces of his cranium on Dealey Plaza. So I just don't see the political process either as the moral and ethical way of trying to solve these problems, or even an effective one if you want to look at the consequentialist argument.
Mm-hmm. All right, Brock?
Well, I'm in the kind of envious or unenvious position of kind of agreeing with all three of you at the same time while having my own opinion here in Australia. I'm completely cynical, but also do understand that it does need to be some kind of incremental step away or dismantling of the system. And of course, the next question that follows on from that is, well, do you do that from the inside out, or do you do that from the outside in? I really long since lost hope of any kind of political or candidate coming in to be able to save a system that is so openly and so blatantly corrupt to its very core. I think that at the federal and the state level is especially apparent. I think at the local level is where it's more achievable and more. There's the very least more accountability for the person or politicians or group of people who call themselves the government. There's more accountability, at least if they're living in the same area or region. I think when you go up to the next layer of the onion, and then the next layer of the onion with state and federal politics like we have here in Australia, and like you guys do there in the States and everywhere else, basically, it just becomes so muddied up with bureaucracy and red tape that of course it's ineffective. So, and then of course, as James pointed out, there's the whole moral and ethical argument, whereas I choose not to support, no matter what good or perceived good that the federal that the state may have in the minds of the public, the inherent evil and the inherent damage and misery that comes from supporting the state is just something that I long since abandoned. So, but of course, if I choose to not be a part of that here in Australia, what happens? I get a fine, or I get a court date. I get, money taken off me, and if I choose not to do that, some guys in suits will come to my door and eventually, take me to court. So, it's an interesting.
Well, I personally don't believe in mandatory voting. I think that it should be up to people to decide if they are going to participate or not. And forcing you to participate, in my view, produces potentially a jaundiced outcome. James, to your points, I deeply respect what you said. And I can understand objecting to the militarism and the imperialism that define America's exceptionalist identity at this time. And I routinely apologize to non-Americans, and so I'll start with you and Brock, because even when I have talked to some of the men who've been released from Guantanamo, they make a big distinction between hating the American people and hating American leaders who were directly responsible for their being held illegally and in an immoral manner. And so, I feel a need to try to separate some of these things, if only to avoid going stark raving mad. Because honestly, when I focus on the military-industrial complex and the damage that it continues to do, both domestically, because we've got bridges falling down and roads that are falling apart, and instead, we built a big highway in Afghanistan that is no longer controlled by our puppet government. And so, there are these systemic and very serious problems. And at a certain point, I think as humans, we have to look at, well, what can we impact? Where can we make a difference? How can we shape the way people think or influence the ideas that might provoke them toward change? And the other piece for me is that I do fear an open revolution in the United States because I think it would make things worse. I think that the gun lobby would dominate any rewrite of our Constitution, and I think that the oligarchs will continue to have outsized influence. So it is a series of Hobson's choices. There are no attractive alternatives, but this is the system that was here when I got here, and I'm trying to do my best to move it in a direction that I feel is appropriate. But I recognize that there are many honorable people who just throw up their hands and say, this is a waste of time, it is a totally corrupt system. And when you get into the issues of deep state and understand that the government we see is not the real government that makes decisions, that commits us to wars, that pursues imperialist adventures at great cost to many humans and to the ideals that we value. And so, for me, those are the contradictions of the human condition.
Well, Peter, may I just push back on that? I do not accept your apology because it is not your apology to make. I would accept if, Henry Kissinger went on an apology tour to Cambodia and Chile and all the other million places where he's wreaked havoc around the globe, or Anne-Marie Slaughter in Libya and places like that, or the people who were responsible for that. But you are not responsible for that. And you accepting that so totally and taking it so totally into your consciousness that you would feel compelled to apologize to people for what the United States government has done in your name is the problem. People have internalized their enslavement to the point where they take personal responsibility for the things that are done by this monstrous system that has been created to rule over them. And that is not a healthy way of approaching this issue. I think that's really what I want to undermine, is this consciousness that people accept by buying into the system, by voting, by participating in it, by waving the flag, go Bernie, go Donald, go Hillary. They buy into the system. And I want to snap people out of that. You are not responsible for the bloodshed that is done in your name if you do not participate in it.
Well, that's a very good point. And I would like to again frame it within the media umbrella and the responsibility that comes with that. And our own personal biases, our personal favoritism, coloring the way things are reported and put out there. And this has been one of the main reasons our website has stayed away from any of these candidates since 2008. I can tell you this, in 2008, I really thought that Ron Paul differed from the rest of them. And I'm very open and honest about that. But still, what I try to do consciously, I try to not to have anything on the side that reflected something personal and that personal leaning in any way. So if you go and comb through our website during this whole election stuff, you won't see, me interviewing people showing that how he is different, even though I believed he was one of those people who was truly different. Now, I don't believe that with Sanders, not even the least. But still, I kept it out there because that was based at personal level. And this is one of the things that I want to make sure that our website has, because we went through the same reasoning with that man, Obama. Okay, this was when people like Ray McGovern, Dan Ellsberg started attacking us openly, saying, don't tell people not vote because I don't even know who was the bastard who was going against Obama. Was it McCain? Who was it? Romney?
It was McCain in 2008.
Exactly. And guess what? We got someone worse than Bush. Nobody thought that was people who supported Obama, but Obama sounded different, didn't he? Did he sound like Bush? I don't think in any way he sounded like Bush. Didn't he talk about protection for whistleblowers? He has already broken record as the worst president when it comes to whistleblowers. He is the one who authorizes these drone assassination, extrajudicial killing. So what Obama as candidate said and got cheered for, had nothing to do with the person we got. And I don't believe that is going to be minutely different with someone like Sanders. But what happens is if our personal leniency ends up bringing guests who are favorable to Sanders and Bash, we are playing the same game. And I want to make sure that NewsBud carries the same integrity. We are not going to advertise for the system's man. And believe me or not, no matter what the words, every single one I see out there, they are the system's men and women. I don't see any difference, and I do not want that tone. I do not want that kind of leniency towards any of these people. And I do the same thing with Libertarian Party, whoever it is. I don't even know his name. We don't do that because that we are outside the system. We have taken pride of being outside the system. That's the reason we are different. That's the reason we have been putting the facts, whether it was Bush or if it's Obama or tomorrow it's going to be Trump or Hillary or Sanders. It doesn't matter. We're still going to be that outside the system because of the principles we hold. And so that's why I would like to frame it within journalism, because no, if they were to ask me personally, there is no difference. There will be no difference, because if that's what we believe, all we have to do is look at 2008 and see what people said about Obama. That media didn't like Obama. He was outside the system. That was actually part of the whole game. A lot of it is about reverse psychology. People want to have underdog. So it's showing Sanders, another guy, the system's guy, as underdog is a good thing. It's a positive thing. That's going to gain support. These are all trickery that the system has been playing, and they have been winning. I don't know why. Maybe it's the willingness, subconscious willingness. People want to keep falling for the same thing over and over again. At some point, you would think we would kind of stop and say, why are we doing the same thing? And doing whoever it is, Sanders or whoever is supposedly independent, is again repeating the same thing. People said Ross Perot was independent. Really, was he?
All right, who wants to go next? Brock, you have a comment?
Yeah, sure. I think I just want to go back to something James says before about the responsibility that the voter has when they do choose to go into the election booth or use the diabolic machine. I think it's a strange magic trick, a ritualistic magic trick that happens, is that there is responsibility, especially here in Australia, on us to vote. But as soon as we do cast that vote, all the responsibility of what that vote means then somehow vanishes into thin air. And that's where I really take issue with, because I know if I do vote for Party Blue or Party B, whoever it is, it's much the same here in Australia as it is in the United States. And dare I even say, the two parties here are even more centre and aligned than even the Democrats or the Republicans are in America, which is a scary thought. And then you've of course got the few independents that do get elected in. They of course have to vote or side with whichever party has power. But I digress. I think it does this weird kind of mental trick where, okay, I put my vote in, and I guess whatever happens in the next 3 years will happen. And if they don't like, or if I don't like what they're doing, then I can just vote in the next guy. And it's this constant cycle. And it's when, Australia's position with the American military-industrial complex is pretty well known. We're in lockstep with pretty much whatever foreign policy the United States puts on the table. So right there for me, regardless of whatever happens, I'm not going to support that, and that's on the local, state, or the federal level. So, but I do understand where Peter's coming from as well, because there is, when you do choose to take a part in the system, especially even on whatever level, and then it goes and does all these horrible, unethical, murderous, corrupt, criminal things. It just, what do you where do you, I mean, do you choose not to take part of it and it still happens, or try to do it from within the inside? So I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That's the missing element of this conversation is, so what is the alternative? What is the alternative proposal? Because it's not just about not voting. It's about, well, what do you do with that energy and time and resources that you have that are not diverted into the political sphere? What can you actually do with it? And from my perspective, if what I want to achieve is a world where voluntary interactions between human beings free of coercion and force and violence are not only the norm, but what is allowed in society, rather than what we have with this, government claiming the monopoly use of violence in a given geographical area, then how do we go about implementing that? And this is a case where the means are the end. The means are the end to what we want to achieve. If you think that voting and engaging in the political process is going to achieve that end, I think that's fundamentally mistaken, because all it will ever achieve is the maintenance of the bureaucracy and the idea that we are subject to the whims of this or that administration. So in order to achieve that, we have to go around the rules and laws that exist. And that's why I advocate the agorist principle of finding ways to interact in the counter economy. This is fundamentally where this lies. The more that we can take ourselves out of the taxed and controlled system that funds and feeds the beast, including the military-industrial complex and everything it does, and the more we can use our resources to help each other in our communities, that is the win. That is the positive. And I think through the practical implementation of agorist principles, by avoiding taxation to the extent possible without getting yourself thrown in prison, and using that money in your own local community to help other people around you, that is ultimately where this has to go. And I think that's where my interest lies in terms of my reporting, is not so much in strategizing the political, how do we go about implementing this or that agenda through the government system, but how do we go about doing these things for ourselves and among each other? And I think that's maybe the missing element to this, because it's not just throw up your hands and, say F you to the government. It's about, well, what do you do with that time?
Well, James, first of all, I do accept your rejection of my apology. And I also applaud the concepts you just described. And I don't know that they are necessarily in total conflict. I think that we can work in our own lives to advance those principles of, individual freedom and a lack of coercion from a government or a society. At the same time, I personally cannot just exit the building and turn off my concerns. And so, for example, this week I did a podcast about what's going on in California, where both the University of California and the state legislature are developing systems to sanction individuals who speak out in opposition to the policies of the State of Israel. And I consider this to be an immediate and pernicious threat. And I have an opportunity to explain this to listeners and get them to participate in the system, which, as Brock pointed out, does work the closer you get to the local level. And here, I see an atrocious set of laws and ideas that are in direct conflict with the First Amendment here, which, again, is in many ways idealistic, and it is arbitrarily enforced or honored. But this is the system that we have and that I have grown up in. And so, yes, I recognize the conflicts that you describe. But I do keep voting. I work as a political consultant to help individuals who I want to see get elected, get into office. And I have seen that does produce marginal change. It does not, rewrite things in the big picture sense. And I don't want to, give in to a sense of total helplessness. But at the same time, I have to concede that I'm not able to change America's imperialist policies or the outsized power that the Pentagon and those who profit from it have built I hope that over time there will be opportunities where we can cut the Pentagon budget and stop a war before we get involved with it. But at this stage, that set of systems is raging out of control, and there's no question about it.
It's so easy to throw the baby out with the bathwater on that one, Peter, because it was the mass global protest leading up to the Iraq War in 2003 that, you know, they were so massive globally, and I of course bought in and protested, and I thought that, you know, how possibly with such a outlandish and public display of not only disobedience but resistance to, you know, to this upcoming war, I thought for sure that the powers that shouldn't be would at least take a back foot, but it changed nothing, and from there, of course, my whole cynicism of the whole system became, you know, was born, and then just kind of grew out of that, and I've kind of slowly started to get more leaning towards at least trying to keep it local and, more importantly, accountable. I think once you reach that critical mass or that non-accountability threshold, I think that's where it really starts to fall apart. But James, do you think that some kind of local body can work with an agorist type system on the local level? And of course the question is, how big is a local community? You know, is it, I mean, you take a city like Tokyo, for example, they would surely need...
the 20 million people in my local area. Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, I concede what Peter said, that agorist principles and some sort of participation in political process are not self-evidently contradictory. They can go together, and to a certain extent they have to, because yes, let's face it, we are living in a world with these governments and with these political processes that are going on that do dictate real things that impact people in real ways. So moving back towards reality a little bit and away from the ideals, we have to deal with that in some respect. So I think there is absolutely juggling that has to go on in terms of that. But if we do move back to a more practical level, Brock, I know you were telling me recently when you were here in Japan, you were telling me about a little thought experiment that you were conducting with some people back in Australia. Not scrapping taxes altogether. I mean, that's radical, but how about the idea if we just direct taxes to those things that we want to fund? And it was interesting, you were telling me about the responses you were getting to that idea from people you know there in Australia.
Yeah, quite a strong resistance. I probably chose to start with, I probably chose the wrong people to bring this up over. It was my father and father-in-law at the time, and you know, my father is an old school truck driver, and my father-in-law was an ex-police officer, and we'd already had a couple of beers. So, but even the notion of me as a sovereign individual who does get taxes taken, you know, sucked out of my bank account or out of my pocket every week or fortnight or whatever. The very idea that I might actually have some control over where that goes in the society or the community that I live in was still so foreign and alien to me. It really took me back, and I still cannot understand why you would not want to remove this kind of magical power that we give the politicians and the treasurers and the tax departments or the Federal Reserve, the central banks, every 3 or 4 years. At the very least, I'm not talking about, you know, completely scrapping taxation here or anything like that, but as a incremental step, why not set up some kind of system? I'm sure we can do it via the web or some other kind of voting votes. I mean, this is something I would vote for, is more control of where my...
Put it on the ballot.
Yeah, exactly.
Put it on the ballot and actually gather. And see, these are the things when learned helplessness, I don't know if Peter or James brought it up, but a lot of learned helplessness starts with us. We keep convincing ourselves, power of persuasion internally, that, well, we can't change that and we can't do that and we can't go. But that is already putting us in that box. And one of the reasons we want to have this media outlet is to break out of that narrow box, because a lot of those things that we view as impossible, they are possible. And I'm not talking about bloody revolution. I'm talking about steadily working towards it, okay? Maybe it will take 1 or 2 generations, but with consciously believing that, yes, we can. And that we are moving towards that, I mean, it starts with that belief system that yes, we are capable of. We are not that helpless, and that is gonna be a great start. The other important point is what I see here, and what we have had with Boiling Frogs Post, and what we want for news, but to be able to air all these different perspectives, philosophies. I want it side by side because 99.9% of the people have never heard of agorism. I got exposed to it through a Corbett report. So then I started looking into it. So, and a lot of those systems, alternative medias, they don't even talk about that because they want that narrow box. I mean, they want to have everything within that. One of our missions is to expand that from that little box and expose our audience to these different perspectives. Peter B's, Corbett's, some of our libertarian people or libertarian-leaning people in one place, and then see a lot of commonalities between these views, but also getting ourselves outside this leash that they have put on us and saying, well, that is too big of a change. We can never get that. I don't believe that. I believe we can.
And I think that this conversation should demonstrate to the people who watch it that we are intelligent people with mutual respect, but different perspectives. And that is so unusual in the media today. The American media has become so stratified and branded so that you cannot operate outside of a very tiny box. And this is what I love about having, the 8 years that I've worked with you, Sibel, is we don't agree 100%. True. But you've never interfered with the work I do. Never. I've never tried to tell you, don't do that. Hey, this isn't right. And so that is the kind of platform that NewsBud will become. And this is where people who are just stultified by the narrowness of American media and getting hammered with just an A or a B, the false choices that are presented on a daily basis. And here we have a group of people who are willing to explore and go beyond our own experiences and the kind of narrowness that is often enforced on our thinking, and look for views and ideas that will challenge the people who become NewsBud supporters and subscribers. And so that's why I'm excited to be involved with this. And nobody in this panel has to win this argument. We don't, we don't have to prevail. This is the kind of creative and intellectual tension that I think is really important so that we are serving the public and that people will call me out and say, hey, Peter, you in the tank for Sanders? And if I hear that, I'm going to respond to it.
I have to interrupt, Peter. I mean, because you summed it up so beautifully. And for me, I consider myself really fortunate. You said since 2008, we have been working together and respecting our differences, and so many people just can't do that. We were just involved in the coverage of this Malheur case, which you covered, Peter, and you interviewed people because what was happening here in Oregon with the protest and then the Finicum shooting, but I had for the first time, because we had a little bit expanded, some people coming and saying, if this side covers this particular thing from this people's side that they're doing that, I'm not going to have anything to do with this side because
I lost 5 subscribers from Oregon who didn't even listen to the interviews that I did. They simply saw the text description of what was contained in the interview and immediately fired off an angry email saying, if you're going to talk about that, I'm not going to listen. And
if you're going to interview these people, I'm not going to work with you. It's not going to happen. And guess what? None of those ultimatum has ever worked because we do have this voluntary-based partnership, meaning you don't like it, you will never be part of this because we don't go with ideologues and we will not operate based on ideologues. And that's one of the things I respect the most when it comes to Peter B. Collins and working with James and working with, people that we have been together throughout these years It's not that ideologue, narrow-minded. You want to be inside an echo chamber? There are millions of outlets for you there. This is not going to be an echo
Sibel,
chamber.
let me interrupt your interruption. I want to add another layer to this, because what you guys are saying is so important, that there aren't a lot of people doing this, and there are reasons why there aren't a lot of people doing this in the media. It's because we could be so much more popular if we were like, I hate you,
Yes,
oh, you
yes.
stupid pinko commie, oh, all that kind of nonsense rhetoric. It's exciting. It gets people clicking and watching. We don't engage in that because we're regular human beings who interact like regular human beings, who have respect for each other and each other's positions, and recognize that there are strong points and weak points to every argument, and nuance and detail. And thankfully, we have cultivated, and we are cultivating, a growing listenership and viewership who actually wants that type of coverage. But the other aspect of this is that, to the extent that the media creates our perception of reality, when all people see is this type of argumentative, this versus this, who's going to win in the knockout fight type of media being presented all the time, that's the way people start to become in their day-to-day life. And that is exactly what is playing out with this election cycle. As it becomes more and more polarized, we're heading towards civil war. And I don't know how literally or figuratively I mean that, but there are huge tectonic forces that are taking place right now.
I agree.
And we desperately need more models of how to interact without devolving into that type of infighting and I hate you and oh, get lost. I can't talk to someone with a different position. The more people see that modeled, people interacting respectfully and reasonably, the more they'll actually be able to do that in their own lives. And that's got to be at least part of the reason why we're doing this.
And let me interrupt the interrupter of the interruption to note that NewsBud is the solution. We are working very hard to build this new media outlet. We're more than halfway to our first funding goal target of $150,000. And we need you to spread the word. Go to newsbud.com. There will be a zippy link here to make it real easy for you to go there. A business plan is outlined there. There's a video that explains our mission. And from there, you hyperlink over to Kickstarter and be as generous as you can. We appreciate $5 and $10 pledges because we know that not everybody has the means to make a big contribution. But the more people who support us, the greater the validation and the more likely other people are to join in this effort. So I want to encourage you to share this video with friends and even people you don't like, and let them know that there is something new and different emerging in the media, and that we are committed professionals who want to bring you the information that we really believe is vital, not the distraction and the shouting and the name calling and, the latest nasty tweet. But we want to focus on the real issues that affect our futures. And frankly, we care a lot about foreign policy and about international coverage that is so weak in the corporate media in this country. And we want to build the contacts, the networks, the resources to bring you independent voices who will offer you the perspectives that you can't find in the American media, whether it's public radio and television, the so-called alternative media, or the obviously flawed corporate media in this country. So I want to thank Brock West, James Corbett, Sibel Edmonds. In San Francisco, I'm Peter B. Collins. I'll see you on NewsBud.
We all know the problem.
The FBI announcing that it has found the passport of one of the hijackers.
We heard a short burst of machine gun fire.
They found supplies of what they call Viagra.
Forget the conspiracy. Listen to our government agencies. These guys are telling the truth.
We all know the solution.
NewsBud will be uncompromised and uncompromising in our independent reporting.
To be able to untangle all these different tangles and to help people understand, and not only understand, but also motivate them to take action in their own communities.
And that's what we want to do it as journalists, and we don't see anyone else doing it.
The solution is us. Together, we can help create a 100% people-funded online media outlet. This is NewsBud. headed up by award-winning activist, publisher, and author Sibel Edmonds, in partnership with a network of seasoned and international producers, editors, and independent investigative journalists. Newsbud will offer original stories and investigative reports, video podcast productions, editorials, and discussion forums. Newsbud's first attempt at crowdfunding earlier this year met with resounding support, and the pledges flooded in, but it wasn't enough to meet the project's goal. Rather than give up, Newsbud has changed its funding strategy and launched a new campaign. This time, Newsbud will raise money in 4 phases over 18 months. The first phase will raise $150,000 in 45 days and will pay for Newsbud's core content production and development team. As a result, the team will start delivering programs and articles in early June so everyone can check out what is being produced before the campaign is even over. Once it is fully operational, Newsbud will be a subscription-based service. People can subscribe and have full site access for $60 a year or $7 a month. But Newsbud's content is meant to be open for everyone to access, so everything that the team produces will be available for free 2 weeks after its initial airing on the site. Tired of getting your news from sources funded by mega corporations?
We're not going to any foundations, we're not courting advertisers. We are going directly to the public to avoid the kind of conflicts and compromises that occur under the corporate media models that we have in the U.S. today.
That's what's exciting about Newsbud to me, is having a solid team that has our back, that everyone plays their own role, and it could be a very successful operation that I'm excited to be a part of.
We are talking about a platform that is so needed during this ticking bomb time frame that we are in.
Newsbud.